speaker for tonight. This is our Economic Development Director for Attleboro, Feerick. And let me give you a little bit of background on Catherine before I turn it over to her. The Attleboro City Council confirmed her appointment in December of 2018. She was one of 30 applicants, and she was the winner. Right? Wow. Or maybe she was, I don't know. Prior to accepting her position here in Attleboro, she was the Downtown Revitalization Specialist for the Appalachian Regional Commission. She was the lead on the projects through a 13-state region. 13 states, that's a lot. Prior to that, she was the Community and Economic Development Manager for is it Delhi Township?
It is not, actually.
Delhi? What?
Delhi.
They
over time erased the GH at the end of their name, similar to Attleboro.
Oh, did they?
Yes.
Okay. They shouldn't have done that. Delhi Township. She's got a master's degree in city and regional planning from Ohio State University. Is that the Ohio State University? As well as a bachelor's degree in history and international studies from Loyola University in Chicago, and she's done lots of projects for us here. If you recall, she was going to be our speaker February 2020. She decided to have a baby instead. Priorities, you know. So we're so happy to have her back after 2 years, and a lot of things have happened in those 2 years in spite of the pandemic, so she's got even more to share with us tonight. So without further ado, let's welcome Catherine.
Thank you, everybody. I just want to open this up by saying, I thank you for sending me some questions in advance. They helped me to kind of redirect the way that my presentation was going. So it's kind of going to be a sandwich with some basic economic development stuff up front. Then it'll segue into the historic preservation piece and how that is an integral part of our strategy. And then we'll end with a little bit more economic development focus, because there seem to be a lot of questions about general activity within our city, and I did want to make sure that I address those questions. So starting out tonight, I wanted to call your attention to this picture. For anybody who might be familiar with it, you're looking down Dunham Street to the west. So in the foreground, you're seeing the development of townhomes at the corner of Pine and Dunham. And then in the medium ground, for lack of a better word, you see two brick buildings that are connected to each other. That's a project that's going to start construction imminently. It's an adaptive reuse project that will transform that mill into 43 units of market rate housing. And then in the very end of the picture, the white building is composite modules. That is phase 2 of the Foster Building project. All of you walked in and you walked right past all the construction work going over there. This is going to be phase 2 of the same project by the same development team. And again, it's going to take a mill that right now is still in operation. There are some industrial activities going on there. And it's going to convert it into, again, mixed income housing, so more inclusive, more family-focused housing. Whereas the project in the middle ground is more young professional commuter type housing. So we're seeing such a diversity of housing stock coming online just in this one picture. The lower density townhomes, which are really geared towards upper middle class families. You see the commuter housing in the middle that's geared towards people who just want to be close to a train station. And then you see more families, but across a range of incomes in the back. I just love this picture because it harnesses both growth and the historic potential of the assets that our city has already. So I thought that was a fitting picture to just start this presentation off with. Next slide. Downtown Attleboro has a ton of diverse assets when it comes to historic architecture and features and just the amenities that it offers. Within this picture, you see a streetscape that has decorative poles for lighting. You have street trees that are uniform in height. They were carefully cultivated to grow together. You also see a range of architectural styles. And within those architectural facades, you see a variety of businesses, from Cedar Rock Bookstore, which also has like a secondhand children's shop in it, to Morin's, to Bank of America window and Liberty Tax, all the essential pieces that form part of downtown. There is a backbone to build off of. And I saw that from the moment I set foot in Attleboro. You can do the next slide. I want to give you a basic definition of economic development because a lot of people, my own mother included, have no idea what I do. And I think it's always a good place to start is kind of define what is economic development to begin with. The most basic definition is to increase the tax base for the city without increasing the tax burden or the tax rate on individuals and businesses. So my role is to try to foment economic growth without weighing down the population. We want to improve the services, lower the individual costs. The only way to do that is to think strategically. So you can do the next slide. There are three big buckets of activities, and this is again kind of speaking to some of the questions that I got early on. Three huge buckets of activities that take up probably 80% of my time. There are plans and studies. That list is really long, and I'm not going to go through everything on it. The reason is because Attleboro didn't have an economic development director for over a decade. There's so much ground to make up. So we're doing studies for parking management, for branding and wayfinding, because we have a whole bunch of signs put up by different people throughout the downtown, and they all have different lettering, different text, different colors, different arrows pointing different directions. So wayfinding is a big part of it. We did a local rapid recovery plan following COVID, just to try to strategize on ways to use the American Rescue Plan Act funds to support our small business community. Just tons and tons of plans and studies. The other two buckets, which are really going to emerge as more of my responsibility as time goes on, are business and development support. And this is things like creating and managing incentive programs through the state and directly through the city, and facilitating development projects. We do that through brownfield support, site preparation work, just calling development teams and making them aware of opportunities that lie in the cities, hitting the pavement and meeting different development groups, particularly those that function in the sphere of adaptive reuse, which is what we're doing a lot of. And when we talk about historic preservation, adaptive reuse is the term that development teams use to encompass that. Next slide. There's a lot more going on though, and typically when you see my name in the newspaper, it's not about the fact that, we're reviewing a new study on a feasibility study for a parking structure. That's not fancy. Nobody really wants to hear about all the grunt work that goes day in, day out. The 20% of the job that is more external facing and based off of partnerships, this is what I like to call activation work. If you create places that people want to be, that feel more comforting and welcoming, people will flock to those places. They'll stay, they'll enjoy music, they'll go and grab a bite to eat. Maybe they have something that they need to run into a convenience store and buy. That's all economic activity. So placemaking work and events coordination is, believe it or not, under the economic development umbrella. Even though it's a small piece of that pie and not what I spend the vast majority of my time on, it's probably what you see in the papers, if anything. Next slide. So what isn't economic development? This is based off of some of the questions that I received because they're very common ones. People always ask me, can you bring in this type of business? Can you bring in that type of business? And I would love to. I've talked to over half a dozen bakers about locating in our downtown. I'm not exaggerating that, over half a dozen. But behind every small business is an individual that invests their entire life savings, that puts a loan with collateral being their home, their car. You can't do all that much to facilitate them making the decision to open the business. Can I find them funding sources? Sure. Can I refer them to partners for training, for support because they're just starting out? I can do all those things, but at the end of the day, it's up to the private individual whether or not they choose to start a business and where they choose to start it. So as much as I long for that bakery, unfortunately, the right opportunity hasn't come along yet. Either they haven't been creditworthy, or they haven't been truly ready psychologically to start the business, or they found a location elsewhere. And as a city, you kind of have to recognize that you don't have a magic wand to just wave, and nor should the government be in the position of just let's fill the storefront with this government-run business. When it comes to grocery stores and larger chains, regional and national chains always look to an area's underlying demographics to decide if they're a good fit. Downtown Attleboro's census tract has only 1,100 households. It's also economically distressed. The majority of this population does not have the disposable income that your regional or national chains are looking for to support opening a location here. You're not going to get a Starbucks because we just don't have the underlying fundamental demographic base that they're looking for. That will probably change in coming years, given the amount of development activity and interest that we're seeing. But as of now, the numbers on the piece of paper in front of them in black and white, they wouldn't take a chance on a community like ours yet. The other piece that is not economic development is real estate services. I wish that I had that skill set, but I don't. If it's not Googleable, I couldn't tell you if the property is available. My background, small business lending and policy work. So I always refer people to real estate agents if they're looking to either fill a space that they own, or if they're a small business and they're looking for a location that works for them. I rely heavily on partners for that, and I really wish that I had the capacity in-house to help people, but unfortunately I cannot be a real estate agent. One exception to this is industrial properties. Obviously, as an economic development director, I need to know what industrial properties are available, their basic size, configuration, and in that area, I am a little bit more active, but it's a much slower area than the small business world. Next slide. So I have a list of priorities here. The one that's going to change the downtown demographics that I just discussed with you is the transit-oriented development district. The purple blob over there, the top piece of the blob is what's now One Wall Street. All of the land to the south of that has been acquired, assembled, specially zoned, fully environmentally remediated because it used to be a city dump, as well as there was a chemical plant that caught fire. So it was a really dirty piece of land. A lot of money was invested through mass development, the EPA, the FTA, preparing this land for development. It's almost there. So within the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to start seeing activity in that purple blob by the train station. And that's what's going to change the underlying demographic profile of our downtown. The next bullet point is where historic preservation fits in. And I guarantee the next slide will get to that. Finding new uses for vacant or underutilized mill buildings, municipal buildings, pretty much any type of building. Those are the golden opportunities. If there's a building that's sitting vacant, that is an opportunity for me to call somebody and say, hey, do you have ideas about this? Let's just think creatively. A lot of development teams want to know about that. They're good conversations. A lot of it depends on the ownership of the building and the price that they attach to it. But when it comes to vacant and underutilized mill buildings and municipal buildings, that's the biggest area of opportunity that we have. A lot of people see that as a negative, but I see it as a positive. It's a unique element of Attleboro's history that can be restored and find new use. Next slide. So what's historic preservation? To conserve or protect buildings or landscapes that are significant to a community. And I chose the Senior Center building for a reason in this photograph, because this is a perfect example of historic preservation that a lot of people don't think about. It used to be a fire station, but fire vehicles got larger and larger and larger. The building became obsolete, but rather than just tear it down, rather than decide that that's the end of it, the city found a new use for it as a senior center. And now the senior center seems to be outgrowing this space, and that happens in cities too. So perhaps the senior center will find a new home, and this building will find a new use yet again. What will it be? Who knows? But it's a treasured part of our community and something that we want to make sure we maintain. Next slide. We have a couple of adaptive reuse and historic preservation projects that are just around the corner here. I'm just going to go through 3 different types because I think that they're all very different and very special projects. The Jewel is immediately to our south. That is 54 Union and 1 Dunham Street. It's 2 buildings that are combined into one. That's the one that I said is professional housing. It's 43 market rate units. It's fully permitted. It's in pre-development right now. It does have some issues from former industrial uses. We've got to clean up the site before the ground officially breaks on it and you start seeing the kind of work that you see across the street. Foster building across the street is under construction. You've seen how amazing just a new set of windows can be to an old building like that. Eventually, this will be 59 units of mixed income multifamily housing, and it has what I like to call the holy grail of housing, which is affordable units that are 3 bedrooms. There are so many families right now that cannot afford to live in our community, and 3-bedroom units that are affordable are almost impossible to find. It's not like this development project alone is going to be enough for that, but it's at least something, and it's amazing that our community is able to have it. Another thing that I really like about 37 Union Street is that it's part of that phased development. It's going to encompass 2 different buildings, and both of them are mixed income. What that means is the developers are building in market rate units too. That's a guarantee to the city. That's a guarantee because they have to keep up the entire property itself in order to be able to rent those units at market rate. So they've got to make sure that they're maintaining their building well. They can't let it fall into disrepair. So this type of model, to include affordable units within a building that encompasses all income types, this is really the kind of model that I want to follow into the future. Next screen. But it's not all residential. We have some really interesting adaptive reuse projects that are taking former mill buildings and turning them into commercial uses as well. I highlighted the Sadler Mill down on Newport Avenue. This is under construction now. It's going to be a manufacturer of historic architectural features like doorknobs and detail work. So I think that's a really a kind of a beautiful, like, poetic use for that building, that you're restoring this historic structure to create pieces and parts to aid in the historic restoration of other buildings. There are tons of other prospects from the old Attleboro High School to the Lamco Mill, which was recently on the market, to 95 Pine Street, which has our nonprofits, to the Dodgeville Mill, 25 Bank Street. There's so many of these properties that have a tremendous amount of potential, either now or into the future. Some of these that are on this list on the right side have already seen some purchase and sale agreements signed, dissolved, letters of intent, all kinds of that froth. The projects never really make their way to the public until the ink's dry, as far as I'm concerned. If they enter the public record, that's when we announce them. But there has been so much activity on some of these buildings. So it's by far and away, this wave of development activity is not over. It hasn't even crested yet. Next slide. I want to talk about the economic benefits of preservation. A lot of people see it as a cultural good and something that makes them proud of their community, but there are real tangible economic benefits, both to the development team and to the community as a whole. So I listed a few of these from both perspectives. It can be less expensive for development teams to go the historic preservation route. It's not always the case, but it can be, particularly to get the kinds of materials that are used in historic buildings. To find a comparable brick building and to make it from scratch versus to use one that's already in existence, it's just not going to happen. You're better off every day just taking a formerly vacant building and working with that. You also have the ability to tap into historic preservation tax credits. These are incentives that are offered on the federal and the state level. They help to fill construction financing gaps, which in our market, we're at a crossroads where our land values are going up, but so are our rents. Right now, we're in a sweet spot where they're able to make these deals work, but they usually still have a little bit of a gap, especially if it's a problematic site that has brownfield contamination or some serious structural problems they have to deal with. You retain unique architectural touchstones within the community, and that has been shown to have an inflationary effect on surrounding property values. There's this concept of authenticity that's often ascribed to Richard Florida and other thinkers of that ilk that say that within urban planning, you really want to attract what's unique, what's special, what feels real about your community. Architecture is one of the strongest tools and the strongest flags you can wave, saying, look at us, we're our own entity. Sustainability and efficiency returns are not often considered, but there's something called an urban heat island effect. Whenever you're in a city and it's denser, the air is just hotter because all the buildings leak out all of their mechanicals with the, for example, like an air conditioning unit. All the smoke or the hot air coming out of the air conditioner unit makes its way into the streets somehow. All the smog from the cars. Buildings like these, once they're restored, their building envelope is tight again. They don't lose as much energy. They're much more efficient. That not only improves the comfort for the residents that will live in this building, but for those of us that are on the outside, we don't have to deal with as much heat coming off of that building or as much cool coming off of that building, depending. So they're real tangible sustainability and efficiency returns. Existing infrastructure is already in place. The city doesn't have to pay to extend water or sewer line to the project, or to replace 20 yards of piping as opposed to 20 feet. So that's a savings to the residents of the city, because you're the one that ultimately is paying your rates on your water and sewer pipes. It also helps to stabilize property values even in recessions. Studies have found this time and time again. There's another school of thought in my discipline called smart towns that talks about this a great deal. Buildings like these don't lose value as rapidly as new builds do, or as less dense development does, for that matter. So even in a recession, you're not going to get as much of a bite off of buildings like this as you would off of the new builds. Next slide. So now I want to segue into some of the current projects, because a lot of these actually came up in the questions. So I want to let you know that I am thinking about them, I am working on them, and everything that I do is grant funded. So I wait for the grant cycles, I put in a ton of applications, and then generally speaking, I have to run really quickly to catch up with all the projects, which is where I am now. Right now, I have a grant to do development review process improvements. That's going to help us as a city to find efficiencies in the way that we communicate to each other and to development teams as they come through our processes. We have some departments that are still paper-based. We want to bring that into the digital world and make it easier for people to view applications across departments, for example. So that's one of our current projects. We do have a small business storefront sign grant program that got delayed just due to the fact that we have to go out to bid for services as a city. And we didn't get bids twice, but we found a workaround. We've talked to our grantor, and we're ready, set to try another approach. We have 2 studies going on right now within our transit-oriented development district. That's the area by the train station that I was talking about. One is a feasibility study and economic impact analysis for a proposed parking structure. This parking structure would serve the needs of commuters, overflow parking for the residential and retail uses that we envision being in that footprint, as well as just a much needed facility for parking within our downtown, other than the ones that are clustered to the north of the downtown. We also have a vision and plan that's going on. It just launched today, actually, that will take a look at the same exact piece of land. And what we're trying to do is build out specs for development teams. We're getting very close in our negotiations with the MBTA, and we think that we're going to be in a position to put that land out to bid by the end of this calendar year. If that happens, we want to provide them with a vision from the city, from the residents. There will be a community engagement component, so please follow the city's Facebook page, read the Sun Chronicle. I'm going to try to blast it out to AACS and everybody else to try to let you know about your opportunities to weigh in on this process. But we want to make sure that before we release that land for development, that the teams that bid on it know exactly what the city wants to see. Downtown parking management plan and branding and wayfinding study. We got 2 separate grants, one from Mass Development, one from the Department of Housing and Community Development, to do these 2 projects. One's going to look at our parking resources and how they can better be utilized. A lot of people, like the question that I got specifically spoke about senior citizens being able to park in front of the establishments that they want. I don't know if that's going to be possible in Attleboro just because of the growth that we've seen. We're going to do our best to try to accommodate needs however we possibly can. There are parking sharing arrangements where private lot owners make negotiations with each other, decide on fees that they pay each other if they need to do that, and they share their parking. That's probably the best way that we could do it. We may also restrict certain lots, such as the one by the senior center would be a logical one, to senior-only parking. That's another option. I don't know what this plan or study will say yet, but I do want to let you know that that is a focus of ours. That's one of the underlying systems upon which the city's built, so it's definitely very important to look at. The branding and wayfinding study, like I say, is going to look at all the signage that we have in our downtown, directional, places of interest, anything that you might want to see as a pedestrian or vehicular traffic as well, and seek to condense it, to make it more attractive, more appealing, and to really highlight all the assets that the city has. We also have the East Attleboro Academy study, which some of you in this room are very familiar with. Where did Brian end up sitting? There you are, way in the back. So we got a grant for a whopping $5,000 to do a little piece of work on the East Attleboro Academy building. Basically what that amounts to is a memorandum that we can use to apply to like federal grant programs that really speaks their language. It's also going to include a list of financing sources that are applicable to that structure and the proposed use. And there's just enough money left over in that tiny little budget to take care of like one little architectural feature and costing that out for improvements. So it's one of those grants. It was defined by my grantor actually as the intern of grants, because it might be a little more trouble than it's worth, but it's a little bit of something, and hopefully we'll get some good information out of it. Finally, we're doing a Brownfields Inventory. I'm working closely with a graduate student team out of the University of Connecticut, and they are combing through EPA records and DEP records at the Massachusetts level and finding sites that have known contamination issues. They're going to look into which ones are easily developable. Either they're in the public realm or they're close to it, or they have a use that's somewhat vacant or underused. If we find good priorities, we already have a grant application in for the EPA's community-wide Brownfields Assessment Grant, and that provides basically the next tier of insights into a property. What exactly are the chemicals? Where are they? Where are they coming from? What do we need to do in order to clean it up? So little by little, we'll tackle the issues of our industrial legacy, which though grand and what built all these beautiful buildings that surround us, it's also left us with the legacy of contamination that we have to deal with. Next slide. The road ahead. There's an awful lot going on. Thankfully, I just hired somebody to work within my office and to handle communications for me. That's going to help all of you to know a lot more about what's going on in the field, because usually I just sit at my desk and I focus on what's the next grant deadline, what do I need to do next, and I rarely have a chance to think about communications or getting the word out in the way that I need to. So, priorities for the next 3 years. Next slide. You'll notice it's only 2 years because I have so many projects that are already under review for funding in this year. We already, for example, have a grant from the New England Foundation for the Arts for $10,000 to do a public art project somewhere in our downtown. I'm working with our library director. I'm doing the fiscal work on the side, on that side of things. She's going to do the advocacy, the call for art, the public engagement piece. We're going to try to find something really cool that we can do for that $10,000. We don't need funding for another district improvement financing district. This is something where you can leverage the increase in property values to fund infrastructure that encourages future development. It's one of those blanket tools that can be used to really just like kickstart a new renaissance. We installed district improvement financing in the transit-oriented development district, and the proceeds from that DIF are expected to be enough to cover the cost of a new parking garage there as well as access roads. So it's a really useful tool to make development pay for itself, basically. We have ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act, that was signed by Congress. I think it was a year and a half ago now. We have those funds set aside right now for small business technical assistance and grant programs. COVID changed so much about small business. A lot of things that people didn't used to do online, they do now. So we have some funding that we want to put into programs to help people, for example, if you're a hair cutter, to embed online appointments on your website, or if you own a restaurant, to have online food ordering embedded within your website, just to help people to pivot and to catch up to where we were all thrust over the course of the last 2 years. Grants that we have in, like I said, community-wide Brownfields Assessment Grant through EPA. We have a feasibility study for a business improvement district within the downtown, which would take a lot of responsibilities off of my shoulders and allow me to have a partner that I can work with in the private sector. A Hispanic business development plan, because every time I do a grant program, I have noticed there has been one or no applications from our Hispanic-owned businesses. We need to do a better job of finding out why that is, because we don't want them to miss out on opportunities that are available to all. Another item that we're going to be doing is the 53 Falmouth Brownfield remediation. I have a grant in for the cleanup of 53 Falmouth Street, which is just north of our downtown, former American Metal Crafts, I believe, building. And that property is currently owned by the city. There's residual contamination on it. There's a resource through mass developments that we can use to clean that up. We think that site has really strong possibility for future development. So that's all in this fiscal year, which starts in July. In 2024, and the only reason these are kicked to 2024 is because either I haven't built the partnerships yet, or because there was another project that took priority for our grant applications this year. An industrial development strategy, specifically one that addresses the needs of the blue economy. That's a regional effort to target anything related to our coasts in the southeastern part of the state. Attleboro doesn't have a coast, but we have a lot of factories that can help contribute to the offshore wind industry, for example, or to electrical vehicles that might roll out, or to marine science and instrumentation. We have a lot of assets that we need to focus on how to make people aware that Attleboro's industrial sector is alive and well and has a lot of capabilities. And then there's a co-working space or maker space build out. I don't have a partner for that yet. We've had several discussions that haven't materialized in a concrete application. But I do want a co-working space. This is a concept where instead of an office where everybody works for the same employer, people who are freelancers or people who work from home most of the time, they can come to this space instead of their office. It's a very popular model in larger cities, but we have an appetite for it here because people keep asking me about it. So that's just a list of all the projects and all the concepts that are underway right now. So we're busy. There's a lot of opportunity here. But I did want to give you a sample of what's going on because some of the questions were kind of forward thinking that I received tonight, and I wanted to make sure that I touched on those as well. Next slide. I'm just going to end with this. Cuddy Court, the space behind the Sanford Street garage, was repaved, re-landscaped, lighting was installed, murals were painted, all through a Mass DOT and a Mass Development grant, so 2 different funding sources. This is what economic development is too. It's getting to know your neighbors, it's going out and it's enjoying the place that you live, it's feeling a strong sense of civic pride. There were vendors, you can't really see them because it kind of cuts off. There were vendors, there was food trucks, there was people everywhere at night downtown. That's what we're building towards. And all the new residents that are coming into our downtown are going to contribute to this feeling. And my hope is that we'll build a community that's strong and vibrant, not just economically, but in terms of culture and in terms of that interpersonal relationship that we've all been missing out on the last few years. Next slide. Thank you. And happy to take any questions. I know I tend to go through things really quickly and float around, so I'm happy to take questions. Sure.
Catherine, you mentioned the purple blob and then the vision plan. Is the plan to sell that entire remaining area to one entity?
So that has yet to be determined. My hope is that we put it out under one RFP and we seek coalitions of developers. So somebody who works in mixed income housing, somebody who works market rate, somebody who does, I don't know, office space. I don't know what the plan is going to say yet. But my hope is that we put it out under one RFP, but we get multiple responses. However, we're early enough in that we could decide to just sell it out piece by piece too. We still have the option to do that.
Thank you.
Is it still possible to cure brownfields by rezoning them as residential?
To rezone them as residential for the brownfields?
Well, I haven't done it in a while, but they would let you build residential on property that they wouldn't allow new industrial.
Interesting. It's kind of the other way around now. There are sometimes use limitations that have to be filed on brownfields that restrict certain types of development. The most stringent of those is housing, because there are some people, particularly the disabled, who can't leave their home. So they're there 24 hours a day. Whereas if you're going to the office, you're only there for 8 hours a day, less exposure. So no, that's no longer considered a cure, actually. They try their hardest not to have residential unless it's completely clean.
Another question, the townhouses that you like so much in Dunham, why did they make them knock them down when they were all built before?
So they were constructed right before the last recession, and they ran out of funding, and the project wasn't complete. So it's my understanding, and I've only been here 3 years, so I may be miscommunicating, but it's my understanding that there were structural deficiencies because they weren't able to finish what they needed to do, and that's why they were torn down. It's my understanding.
One other question, is there any problem with demolishing the mill buildings because frequently it's cheaper and more predictable to build new construction unless you can get the historic tax credits?
Yeah, I mean, my thing is sometimes that is the way that it has to go, is demolition. It really depends on the structural integrity of the building itself and the cost when it comes to the development team. We have our incentive programs, we have tax increment financing, and we have housing development incentive program. The local piece of both of those is an abatement on new taxes. So obviously if you make a big shiny object where there used to be a hovel, you're going to pay more in taxes. These programs, you're still paying more, but not as much as you would on the full amount of the new project. So we have, I guess, criteria that we use to rank projects that come into us, and we certainly value projects that save the building's architectural facade at the very minimum, higher than we would buildings that would just demolish it. But sometimes it's not an option. Sometimes you do have to demolish.
Could you use your influence to get my street repaired? I've been trying to. They laugh at me, they show me the door, and they pull me out.
Right.
And finally the city says if I want my street repaired, I have to pay for it.
Oh boy, is it a private street?
No.
Some in Attleboro are private streets.
Now it's a public way, one of the oldest ones in town.
Oh, which one?
What street?
Thatcher.
Oh, Thatcher.
Yeah.
Thatcher should be
The
repaved.
city tore
It's
up all
right
the
there.
pavement 50 years ago and they've never replaced it. So my land is landlocked, I can't even build houses there. Unless I pay to have the street repaired.
Oh, well, what? I have my email address right there, as well as my phone number. Just get in touch with me. I will.
I just had to
I'm always
say
happy
it in
to
front of an audience.
That's okay.
Do you have any ideas for the old high school? It's been on the market, and
Yes.
I don't know, it's a tough piece of property because there's no parking, and
The parking actually isn't as much of a concern, believe it or not. I was surprised too. Because of the grade as it approaches Fifth Street, there's a very easy way to deck parking there at apparently an affordable price. I couldn't explain it to you beyond that's what multiple developers told me. However, the limitations, if you're going to be constructing housing, which every single one of the people who was interested in the property was a housing developer, you cannot create housing without natural light somewhere. If you look at the facade of that building, on both sides, it's this windowless hulk in the front, and that's very hard because you can't use that space. On the inside too, there's that massive central atrium, and there's no natural light there. I actually had one developer tell me that he would, honest to God, just bolt off the doors and let the inside of the building rot. And that would be the only way that he would make money on the deal. So it's an incredibly challenging property to do. I personally am starting to lean, just like we just discussed, I'm starting to lean towards demolition because it's better to have something of use than to have a building that, we all like the facade. It's a beautiful facade, but if it's just gonna sit there and rot and nobody can use it, I mean, we had so much developer interest, and at the end of the day, we only ever received one proposal, and that proposal required a piece of financing that the city couldn't offer. Like, it was just against our municipal abilities. So, that just speaks to how challenging that building is to develop.
It seems like that County Street area is such a good space for housing rather than downtown Attleboro. For people, because you've got the park and you've got the downtown, the station and everything there.
Yeah, well, if you look at Attleboro like on a map, the new wave of development started down South Main Street with Christopher House. Really, Christopher House is the first new. Yeah, Christopher Heights. Sorry, Christopher Heights is the first new housing available within downtown, and then you got Renaissance Station. Then you got One Wall Street. Now you're starting to see it along the Union Street corridor, with the Foster Building, the 54 Union, 61 Union, and there's more interest on Union Street. And then if you go down County Street, now we're starting to see serious interest on County Street too. It's just the interest came later. We're starting to see we've got two sites that are super hot on County Street, and hopefully I'll be able to announce something very shortly on at least one of them. And then we've got the high school, which is a tremendous opportunity, and there is interest in it. It's just that they can't make the numbers work. So yes, County Street is very attractive for a different type of development, but the whole of our downtown area is ripe for investment right now, just for different types of people with different needs.
Catherine, what about the old hotel across from the Sun Chronicle on South Main Street?
Yeah, that one is still underway. They got delayed on the demolition piece of it. I don't know the details, but I've been in contact with them pretty regularly. They were also delayed due to a very long delay from the Department of Housing and Community Development regarding the state piece of the Housing Development Incentive Program. The city did our piece. The state sat on it for a very long time. We still haven't received a letter from the state, so we can't proceed on the city end. So that's another thing that's delaying them. However, it's my understanding that the development team isn't concerned. They're ready to go, but they just need to get the last couple pieces in line to make it move.
Is it market rate or mixed use?
It's market rate. So that one's going to be a demolition. It's going to be 45 units of housing, and the whole first floor is going to be fully ADA accessible, designed for full accessibility for those with disabilities. So I really like that because that's a different type of housing in our downtown.
There was something on the screen for Bacon Street, and I grew up down that end of town. I'm a South Attleboro girl, and I wondered what that was all about.
All right, so that's actually an interjurisdictional hotspot. There is a road that is closed off that belongs to the city of Pawtucket, and they won't reopen it. It has been directing heavy industrial traffic down Bacon Street for years now. In addition to that being a pretty heavy industrial area of Attleboro as well, there are several large corporations that have manufacturing and warehousing down that way. So all of this truck traffic is going up Bacon Street, and they're all trying to turn left onto Route 1 so that they can access the interstate. There's no left turn lane. And it's causing undue burdens on all the people who are trying to use that area, not just the industrial traffic.
Excuse me, where is Bacon Street?
Bacon Street's the far south end of the city, like almost at the Pawtucket line.
Well, there's Turner Street after it. Well, there's East Bacon, Bacon, Turner, and then I don't know what.
State Line Scrap used to be.
Yes,
State Line Scrap. Up on that corner.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's fine. The state line scrap's still there?
Yeah, but it's been taken over by a conglomerate.
I see.
The Burke sold.
You used to see the piles of scrap, and my father's car, we were on the other side of Washington, would have like dust from the rust that would come off of that. Oh, God. Great, huh?
Yeah. Well, I lived in a town that had a big battery chicken egg factory, and that I remember, like as a kid, like just thinking that's how summer smelled. So we all have our memories.
So what is the plan? Is there a plan? Because there was a huge manufacturing factory in that direction that was on the border of Attleboro and Pawtucket that has been torn down. I believe the owner had wanted some interest about it being a new MBTA station, but that did not happen. And somebody else had some interest in a water park a number of years ago. Any?
So it's privately owned. I can tell you that I've sent several individuals who are interested in it over that way. Nothing has worked out, but I don't know the reasons why. Generally speaking, if it's privately owned and the person's interested in disposing of the property, I usually just try to let market forces do their thing.
I think he's more worried about the golf course that he owns too at the moment.
Sorry if you already mentioned it. Any plans with the train station and expansion with the anticipated increase in population with all of the new builds?
You're talking about the central station, right? Yeah. Yes. So they're doing some Band-Aid repairs this year, but from what I understand, the MBTA board has recognized that the Attleboro station desperately needs renovations. I don't know year-wise when that will happen, but I do know that if we're able to sweet talk them into constructing the parking garage that I want to build there, it's going to kick into effect a requirement that will force them to fully come up to code on their accessibility. Again, it's in the future. I can't tell you when it will happen, but I have heard that their board is agitating to upgrade their stations throughout the system, but especially on this line because this line's going to become electrified first.
What about the MBTA one near South Attleboro one with the big, what is it, market?
Close one.
Yeah, that one's, it's closed actually because they're upgrading it.
Is that ever gonna come back? Or?
Yeah, it's gonna open, I think it's, gosh, I couldn't tell you when it's gonna reopen. That's not, unfortunately, I only hear about that project like once a month, so I never remember the dates. But what I can tell you is that it's only closed to make the repairs. It's over $40 million worth of repairs. So that station is kind of a precursor to what's gonna happen in the center of town too.
That place is a mess.
Another question. There's a building on Bank Street across from Cuddy Court.
Celeste's, the 25 Bank Street there with the former bowling alley.
Yeah. Is there anything going on there?
Again, it's privately owned. The owner has been hesitant to even discuss a sale. I wish I could tell you why. I have 3 developers that are really interested in that and no interest from the seller. But that is one of my projects that I really want to happen.
Is there any plans for where the South Attleboro MBTA station is of creating a transit-oriented district in that area, especially where it borders Rhode Island, the train station? I know somebody had mentioned something about the new development where the Atlantic Golf Course is, but that's quite a distance off. Hopefully that, it wouldn't spread that far up 1A, but along that Turner Street area.
Yeah, so what I will tell you, our planning director, Gary Arazian, who I work very closely with, he explained to me something that I never intuitively thought of until I looked at it on a map. He referred to something as the triangle, and it's where 1 and 1A intersect. He has plans for that area and the surrounding neighborhoods to be a site for new growth. It's not an imminent plan by any means, but just he wants to prepare that for new growth because it seems to be organically happening anyway. That area plus the Bristol Place shopping center, that's doing well enough that I don't foresee any immediate change by any means. But because there's a new requirement for MBTA communities to designate a certain radius around their train stations as being by right multifamily housing, we're going to do that in South Attleboro, same as we are at our central station. So at least from a zoning perspective, it can happen, and it will be by right. They won't have to go before the Zoning Board of Appeals. It'll be a streamlined process. That's not a plan, though. So I'm telling you, like, we're kind of preparing for the eventual, but it's not a plan. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Anything else?
Keep up the good work.
That was nice.